Now we're going to introduce wonderful people that are going to be presenting today. So presenting with myself, we have Ben calling in from Australia. It's very late there, so thank you so much, Ben, for being part of this. We appreciate it. We have Elizabeth M Castillo calling in from France, I believe it is. And she has a book out called Caroncito. You can tell me if I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Caroncito.
Caroncito. Oh, beautiful. Look at that cover too. We have Katy coming in from the UK with her new book, Postcards from Ragnarok. And we have Shiksha Dheda coming from South Africa and her new book, Washed Away. Beautiful. And I wish that I had one of my books handy to hold up, but you can pretend. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. We'll jump right into it. I believe we have Ben first up on the docket here. So we are going to get him nice and big on our screens here. And you can feel free to take it away.
All right. So a little while ago, I wrote a project called The Cripple Who Is Whole. It was about my experience as like an athlete, but also someone struggling with a lot of issues with my mental health. So I had this, like my physique was quite good and I wasn't the poster boy for depression, but I probably was in a lot of ways because of that. This first poem, if that chapbook was a album, this would have been the single off of it. It's called Cavalier. I wake up hungover on a Wednesday, roll out of bed into 2 cups of coffee, taking white with no sugar but 4 tabs of Panadol. I inhale an anxiety cure as an afterthought, and 20 minutes later, I'm at my psychiatrist trying to explain to him the inexplicable, trying to explain to him why I'm sad. He starts with my father. Have you seen him lately? Does the tick-tock of the clock still remind you of the rhythm he beat into the sounds of your soul? I tell him no. Not except for a nightmare where I saw him in Stockholm with a boy that shared my name, but none of my disposition, the son he always wanted, perhaps. My psyche, he wants to know more, but it was dusk, I tell him, and I lost them in the darkness. What about your anxiety, he asks. Have you been feeling anxious lately? And I cannot help but quip whether a snake still scrapes its scales and its skin in my sack. He tells me he's just trying to help. I never know what he wants me to say, that yes, there are still bad days where the nighttime from my nightmare bleeds over my bedroom door and I cannot go outside, or yes, I tried to take that time off of work, but one of my managers messaged me until I had an attack instead of feeling any better. Or yes, I still write about it, like I can stop writing about my one constant companion, that abusive lover that would neither let me sleep nor be. Instead, for some reason, I decide something about the good. Even if just so one of us can pretend like we're making a difference. So I tell him about Sam and how Sam asked if I was feeling any better, how I lied to Sam because I didn't know how to have that conversation. I tell him about Asha, who drove to my house in the middle of the night and stayed with me till I could stop crying for a little while. Would you describe yourself as feeling depressed, he asked. And I smiled at him sadly, like a teacher asks a silly question by a student clever enough to work out the answer for themselves. I tell him that there is a sun bright and golden inside my head, that bright and golden like any other, but is hidden now behind an eclipse so old that I've begun to forget the feeling of sunlight dancing across my face. So yes, I tell him, yes, I am depressed, and yes, one day I will feel better. But in the meantime, yes, it's poetry. Thank you. This next one is a new one. So a few years ago, I toured this show, and I would set everything up exactly the same, because I always find that like the idea of performing is much more scary than actually performing. This poem is about the joke. It's called Peekaboo. I used to joke that I never felt anxious while I was on stage. When I'm performing, everything becomes a fixed variable. There'll be a mic somewhere kind of my face, an audience somewhere in front of me. Often I'll put a stool to my left so I can put a glass of water on it. Too often these days, I don't make it out of bed. I don't know if I should call my bookie and tell them I have bedhead, that I couldn't comb my hair right, my Frankenstein screws just couldn't take, I caught my hand between the sheets and I'm sorry, Jimmy, not tonight. Sometimes my depression and I play peekaboo, play at ignoring object permanence, lie like the sheets of the edges, and we are playing shadow puppets, laughing with one another like we are children, and the world has not touched us yet. It's a strange thing how we become accustomed to space. Perhaps the edges of my bed are a stage, and perhaps I can play at being all kinds of people while I'm here. Perhaps I could be a president. No, I don't think I would like that. My hair will soon go gray enough already. Perhaps I could pretend to be a football player. So when my legs run in the night, I'm just practicing. Maybe I'm a wrestler. I know I don't look the part yet, but maybe that's why I thrash and fight. It's all in good fun. Sometimes my sheets are haunted, inlaid with the stain of ghosts and memories. And I think ghosts might be pretty scary, but it's worse when you recognize them. Like if you can't tell if your subconscious mind is trying to find an answer to grief or how to solve a jigsaw puzzle without a part that you gave away to someone kind or someone that smiled to you. And the worst thing about grieving is looking at yourself and asking yourself about all these things that might have been if. If is the most awful word in the English language. If conditional such that the variable you might change something, anything really. I am haunted by what ifs. Some nights they look like you, but some nights they look like me. Sometimes it's like you and I are standing ankle deep in a pool of memories, except some nights you are not there and there is no one to hold my hands or yours, and the pool is deeper than I ever realized and I'm drowning in it. I'm drowning in it, thrashing like my eyes are closed and I do not know which way is up. And sometimes I wonder sometimes whether nightmares are your brain problem-solving worst-case scenarios. So when it comes up, which it hopefully never will, your brain already has an answer ready. And that's all well and good, but it would be nice if brain asked first. And I am drowning in ankle-deep memories. When I was little, I nearly drowned. I forget the specifics of how I got myself into such a misadventure. Still, I remember it being dark, being afraid, being alone. I remember letting go of a half-held breath, opening my eyes and following the bubbles to the surface as if a dream. Open your eyes to your left. Somewhere there is a glass of water. In front of you is a microphone. I don't tell jokes about never feeling anxious anymore. They feel disingenuous. Shakespeare wrote that all the world is a stage. I hope not. I would hate that. I could spend a lifetime in the audience, though. Never get tired of listening to you. Thank you. This next one leans into the autofiction a little bit. So I remember going to a psychiatrist one time and just seeing this other person across the waiting room, be like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to talk to them in a way. Obviously, don't do that. But like my brain just kind of felt like, what would you actually say? How do you approach that? So this next one is called The Words I Wish to Say to the Girl on My Psych's Waiting Room. Hello, and I'm sorry. I promise we're going to be okay. You were an island and it doesn't matter how powerful the storm. I know the lashes of rain will hurt, but you will survive and be here after. Anxiety feels like suffocating while standing in the middle of a ring of fire. You know there is danger there, but your body doesn't hurt yet. Your cheeks flush, your eyes close, hands shake. Stop, that is not where you are. The expression getting along like a house on fire has always seemed strange to me. Like the only relationships I felt like that were toxic ones. And even if they held all this potential energy, they were always going to be short-lived. And as I crawled out beneath the burning wreckage from the toxic fumes might scar my lungs, my thoughts, my memories. Every night I think about all the things I want to say when I come here like my psychiatrist is confessor. And I can't decide if I'm the sin, but I know you're not. And I hope you find a way to be happy. If you tie a rope around the ankle of a baby elephant, by the time it is grown, it will not know it is strong enough to break free of the rope, so it does not try. You were strong enough to choose to be free. The funny thing about chains is we forget they are there. They become part of the everyday, like brushing your teeth or taking a shower or forgetting that someone loves you. Emancipation takes conscious deconstruction of the walls and fences that keep us penned in, and you can knock them all down if you acknowledge they're there. The mind can be like an escape room, with no ways out and all these puzzles that you think you have to complete to get to the next door or the next stage. And you might be turning pages like you just want to get to the end of the story or the answer. And maybe the mind is more like a pyramid or a labyrinth. I've often felt like a lab rat stuck in a maze with no way out. That's why I come to therapy. And do you ever feel like this? Sometimes I feel like a scarecrow standing in a field watching all these ravens swirling in the sky above me, except my scarecrow eyes have never seen a raven before, so all they see are these living, breathing shadows. I don't know if they'll eat me or eat the corn, but I'm afraid of these shapes in my scarecrow eyes, and I can't stop thinking about them. In the church I worked in, every morning before I turned the lights on, I'd light votive candles for everyone in my heart, my mind, for every story that I thought God could change if he put his mind to it. I've often thought that God must be a poet with the right sense of humor, and I think he loves building suspense as much as he loves building cathedrals. Each morning I would light these candles like they were a lighthouse, and I was trying to guide God home to you. And I don't go to church much anymore, but if I did, I'd light you a candle because you deserve to be happy. And I'm so proud of you for being here and for being alive. And I don't know if God sees you, but I do. You deserve candles, and you deserve a lighthouse, and you deserve to find your way home after being lost at sea all these years. I don't know if Odysseus could have survived your journey, but you have. And that's an incredible story. I'd love to hear all of it someday. Instead, I say nothing. Thank you. This is the last mental health poem. I'm going to shift to some other stuff, change gears up a bit. So this last one, quite overtly, it's called therapy. Therapy is a lot like getting into a hot shower. The first time you touch it, the water might be a little too hot, a little too cold. You might want to go a little faster or slow it down. You may feel like Goldilocks trying to find the perfect time or temperature. There is none. Therapy is a lot like getting into a hot shower. Sometimes you will touch the warmth of the water, and instead of sunlight on Sunday morning when you wake up next to someone that you love, it will remind you of burning your hand on a stove, or it will feel like drowning in gasoline and feeling something come alive, like sparks dancing across your chest, setting the liquid alight, or it will feel like a house fire that you survived once. You will survive again. You already have proof of concept. In therapy, someone will pass you a glass of water. The fire will go out. Sometimes the shower will be too cold. Sometimes you will forget when you touch it. You will forget everything else. Your skin will flare with goosebumps, and you will want to recoil to pull your hand back. It always gets better. Years ago, I lived with someone in a small apartment of 4 rooms built in a square. We had nothing, but we were together. Sometimes the shower would stop working, switch without warning from warm to cold, from cold to boiling. Later, we would laugh, but at the time, it would feel awful. Therapy is the same. Sometimes torrents of tears turn into laughing hysterically, deliriously, deeply with someone you love. When you get out, your spirit will be clearer, will smell less. Sometimes being in the shower reminds you that you're alone. It will feel awful, and you will not be able to explain why. There is nothing wrong with taking a shower alone. You do not need someone with you in every moment. You were born whole, and whatever happens, no one and nothing can take that from you. I spent years showering with someone I loved, laughing at little things, massaging their shoulders after long days, or helping trace soap across their story as the small of their back. It is strange associating your smile with the smell of soap, the cold of tiled walls with kissing you. Feeling our smiles whisper warmth where our pain used to be. There is no healing in sex or in being held. There isn't remembering and letting go. There isn't therapy. There isn't sitting in a hot shower after it will feel like an iceberg inside your skull is melting inside it. There is all this frozen trauma. It will ooze out and make you sick. This will last a little while. Sometimes you have to let the radiation kill the cancer, or let yourself go and know this was your doing. What happened to you is not your fault, but how you respond is. You have survived every day of your life. It is time to live again. Tomorrow, you will put on pants and get out of bed. It may feel impossible, but you will. You will turn on the shower and it may be hot. That is okay. Therapy taught you how to take a shower. Thank you. One more, I think. Then this last one is for Elizabeth, something I wrote for her a little while ago. Only takes a drop of rain to break a drought. And why is my mailbox always full of bills and not love letters? I had an artist residency once in a decaying old building that tasted like Gothic decadence gone insane, dripping with hallowed stories like vampire kisses whispering down the walls and a soft, alluring kind of madness. I would write late at night, kept company by little doves, the smell of paint I left on a wall, in a fit of artistic pique or exasperation. The only sounds were the soft call of lonely rain, the echo of clickety-clack train track carrying pendulum people to and fro, unhappily swaying side to side, awake to sleep, to waking to sleeping, until it all blurred into microdosing Mondays, suits worn out to the races Tuesdays, but your paycheck on the pokies, but don't burn it all down, because where are we going to live if we set fire to the doghouse? It only takes a drop of rain to break it down. The most perfect kind of intimacy is the kind I have with someone who only knows me from the ink etching I left inside a book of poetry I've left in Elizabeth's. There will be no price tag. It will not appear in stock take. No, my footprints and their shadows will be the only evidence on the wood floors of quiet underfoot as I, the reverse thief, leave you the last breath of poetry, that one gasp you need to wake up from resuscitation to retaliation against the kind of living that is always trying to kill you. I will not be there. I never am. Catch my answering machine if you can, like a fridge. It is always running, always hopping, never stopping, always out of breath. I will be in the north. Somewhere letting time and red dirt trickle through my fingers like I am holding the drought in my hands, waiting for it to look beautiful. I think rich old white women might bottle it to take home to their pristine porcelain tile floors, marble archways to say, look here, isn't it dirty? And doesn't that make it beautiful? You can commodify anything if you try hard enough. Look at me selling my skin and stories for just one more bite of the pie. It only takes a drop of rain to break a jar. I'm dripping sweat and adrenaline at this point in the poem. My hands are wet and dripping, my lips dry and nervous, and I'm only here because someone made it rain yesteryear. I've been looking for it, digging my hands through dirt and time, and maybe I was looking for you, but that wasn't what I found. Why is my mailbox always full of bills, not love letters? It's because I never asked for them. All the best conversations start with hello. The best books of poetry are slim, skinny, not like those Instagram bitches that bully and butcher your self-esteem like they are ghost haunting the tired walls of an old hospital that folks let me heal myself with poetry in. The best books may not have an ISBN, no barcodes masquerading as Rorschach tests. Maybe those books are little windows into the soul, and some will howl the angle, shriek sadness, speak pain and betrayal. Some will be true love letters, and maybe they won't arrive straight away to your letterbox or fall magically down your chimney, but say hello. It only takes one drop of rain to break a drought. Thank you very much for being Ben Riddle.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was absolutely amazing. Wow. That was an experience. So next up we have Elizabeth. I'm dropping the link to Elizabeth's book in the chat now. And there's also going to be 2 files coming your way for 2 of the poems that she will be reading. So just because they are in a multilingual format, so that it makes it easier for people to follow along. So I'll pass it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Perry. And my goodness, bit of a hard act to follow, especially thank you for reading my poem. I love it. It's amazing. And just to clarify, Elizabeth is also the name of a bookstore in Australia. Yeah, that's also what the poem was about as well, in part. So as Perry said, I'll be reading from my debut collection called Caroncito. The first poem of which was written as, well, maybe before I actually start reading my poems, Caroncito is Spanish for a little drawer. And the idea was I had a whole bunch of poems, some that were written when I was a teenager, some that were written recently, that were very full of feeling, but obviously with time the feeling had sort of gone, but what remained were fairly good poems. And so I felt like they needed a home, really, and to be put out there. And it was on love, loss, y otras locuras, which means other madness, which is basically everything I couldn't categorize into love and loss. So a lot of these poems are very achy or very heartbreaky, the loss of a lover, the loss of a friend, the loss of a child, the loss of many things like that. But a lot of them are also fairly self-deprecating, because I always think that's a very healthy way of getting through life, really. And this is one of them. This is called Can I Send You My Poems? It was written as a bit of a joke, but it's actually proved to be one of the more popular poems from the book. So let's get going. Hang on a second, I've lost all of you guys. There you are. Can I send you my poems? Can I bind these words together with the finest filaments of my hair? Can I set the spine with the viscosity of my affection? Can I wrap this humble offering in eggshell and earth, so that on their way to you, new things, green things, might sprout up in between each whispered word? Can I etch the destination across my ribcage, right there, where the wound you gave me almost bled out? Can I slice it open, press you inside, and sew it back up with gauze and spider silk? Hold my breath so you don't escape? Can I tear myself down to only skin, steal into the forest under cover of night, launch myself from the tallest canopy? Can I hang, suspended on the wind, clamber into the undercarriage, nestle myself between the blades of the whirring motors, fall asleep, head resting against the lull of this strong, steady machine? Can I feel the 100 tons of thrust cradled beneath me? Can I throw my entire self into the welcome embrace of the ocean? Can I cleave, breathless, my way across the seas? Can I scale the mountains, erected defiantly between us? Fight bare-knuckled the beast that live at altitude? Can I crush their venomous bottom-dwelling brothers beneath my heel? Can I harness the finest desert stallion, ride him, barebacked and broken, into the city, against the wind? Can I climb the trellis of your castle, slip in silently through the window of your room? Can I curl myself around your sleeping body, weave my limbs and yours into a divine tangle, rest my head in your neck's crook? Can I bury myself beneath you, absorb myself into your sweat and skin? Can I burrow deep into your teeth's enamel, stretch myself along the slant of your nose? Can I wrap your thinning hair around me, shrink into the hollow of your clavicles, navigate the tunnels of your bloodline from heart to wrist? Can I find my home in the juncture of the veins that gather there, dissolve myself into the lifeblood and disappear into that glorious red? Or can I just send you some of my poems instead? So that was Can I Send You My Poems? It was it's the opening poem of Caroncito. It's always very weird reading on Zoom because you're reading a bit into a bit of a void. So yeah, you can't really feel people's reactions. The next poem I'm going to read has been put in the chat, I believe. It's an after poem written after E.E. Cummings's I Carry My Heart With You. It's in English and in Spanish. A lot of Caroncito, all of Caroncito is bilingual. It's English and Spanish, and some poems have English, Spanish, French, and Creole within them as well. And this is a short poem, which is just really my response to that wonderful E.E. Cummings poem. And it's called Yo vivo en tu corazón, which means I live in your heart. Yo vivo en tu corazón. I swam up through the arteries, painted its walls en mis colores, aligned el suelo with my plants. Puse una canción que no tiene letra, fought the battle that's already been won. Watch the slow, steady pace of the snail. Dejé al amanecer partir en dos, the horizon. Es una cosa tan chiquita que no escucha nada de razón. Me llevas contigo. Where you go, I go. Me llevas contigo. Yo vivo en tu corazón. Thank you. That was my little ode to E. Cummings. Sweet Ben, thank you. It's a bit of a schmoopy poem, but I like it. Okay, next up, I would quite like to read. I want to keep my multilingual ones a bit spaced out. We're going to move away from love for a minute, and we're going to read a poem that some of you might have seen already online. It's published for a Top Tweet Tuesday on Twitter. It's a very painful poem, and I should say it needs a content warning for mention of miscarriage. And it's called Context. And although I'm not big into explaining the reason behind the origin of poems or the meaning of poems, this one is an important poem to me because I wrote it it was a feral cry from my heart that everything we do and everything we feel exists within a context. Nothing is just isolated. And so this is sort of like my manifesto of how I came to be a certain way. Context. I did nothing wrong. And death came for half my family, 3 mothers and a friend. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong, and I lost my baby on the bathroom floor. I lost half my mind in the hospital waiting room. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong, and I lost you. I lost you. Strange, complicated hurt. An accumulation of all the losses that came before. Just trying to protect you. I did nothing wrong. I know my life is golden, and I know that with help, I have fought so hard. I don't know how to scrub this watermark from my ankles, how to stop the ends of me retracting, how to feel half of a thing, politely decline the other half, how to hold myself in place. I did nothing wrong. How not to bleed. Every circumstance, all over the floor. I did nothing wrong. Thank you. That was context. How am I doing for time, Barry? I actually don't know. Okay, all right. So now we've done something fairly sad. We're going to continue with something else that's fairly sad. This is one of the first poems I wrote for Caroncito. It's multilingual. It's also coming out soon in Pollock's Journal, third issue. They're a literary magazine who focus on multilingual poems. And this was one of the first poems that got me thinking, maybe I have enough to write a collection, actually, or enough to put together into at least a chapbook. And it's called Paris, mi-octobre. Hang on a second, actually, I'm going to read it from here rather. I stand unsteady before the room. À Paris, le mois d'octobre. What am I to teach them? How can I show them what it is to talk? How to cut the thoughts down into word shapes and coax the heart and the tongue into speaking. Conditionals, perhaps, the language of what could never be or what might have been. English is forgiving. It has no proper subjunctive, but it makes provisions for the unreal and allows the imaginary its own clauses. And this classroom I love, this stage, this castle, is a prison, is a desert, is a small, small box. The French have no word for kindness, which is very telling, I find. They also struggle with a thistle, a thorn, thirsty, and a thunderstorm. But Spanish has 3 words for love. The time for paseo is behind us. Le pont Birakiem, le Grand Palais, les champs, la butte, le marais. The French and their lisping will just have to wait. Now that I have only myself and my thoughts for company. I told you once. And it was in Spanish, creo yo. I can hardly remember, but I told you once. The heart was never designed to break in Paris or in English. So that was Paris mi-octobre. Now I'm going to go to something that's a little bit more punchy, so you guys all don't fall asleep or burst into tears. This is one of my absolute favorite poems that I've ever written, so I'm super excited about it. It's also going to be, well, it has just been published actually, by a literary magazine called Bandit Fiction. Perry, can you mute whoever that is? And it's called Gathering My Children to Me. And it's one of those poems, there are poems that take a lot of work. They sort of, you come back to them, you labor at them. There are poems that just kind of spill out onto the page like blood or word vomit, choose your bodily fluid. And this was definitely the latter. It just sort of fell out of me. And I wasn't sure about it because it was very unlike anything I'd ever written. But as I've come back to it again and again, and now I've published it, I really do love it. It means the world to me. We're not meant to have a favorite child or a favorite poem, but it's kind of this one, so I do. Okay, so Gathering My Children to Me. Come on, unbending sense of justice. Come on, bitter, bitter sting of betrayal. Come, poetic sensibility, you're needed elsewhere. We're leaving. Explanations, justification, reasons, hold each other's hands now, settle down. Come on, fresh tears spilled into clean laundry. Come, those few thrilling seconds I hold myself underwater in the bath. Come, sweet, bewitching intensity. Step this way, total regard for consequence. Come, pride. Come, faith. Come, bloody, scuffed up knees, it's time to go. We've long outstayed our welcome. Come here, crippling need to please. Come on, hurry up, food intolerance and chronic pain. Come on, long now, depression. Out you get, stretch your legs a little. Come on now, breath caught in my chest that could be asthma, but I'm pretty sure is regret. Come back here, sensitive skin, eclectic Spotify playlist. Come here right now, childhood session with dinosaurs. Get down from there, corruptible self-assurance. Come procrastination, I'm not going to say it twice. Come now, self-flagellation. Come, increasingly perpetual anxiety. Come wit, come dry, absurdist humor. Yes, you can sit up here by me. Come on over here, darkest of all dark clouds. I've made room enough for you in the sky. Come now, ambition, wait your turn. Come, easy forgiveness. Come on, too many reasons why. Get back here, lust. You have done enough. Settle down, bruised and vindictive pride. Let's go. Come on now. We're leaving. We can't stay a minute longer. Watch out for oncoming traffic. That's it. Hope against all odds. Right, then left, then right again. Come on now. No time, no reason, no chance to say goodbye. We should have all been long gone by now. Thank you. So yes, that was Gathering My Children to Me. Perry, am I okay for time?
Maybe one or two more.
Okay, one or two more. All right then. I'm going to do another multilingual one, which is a love poem that was originally, in my opinion, not a love poem in spite of its title. But a friend of mine said that it was because it's about the so many different ways in which you can love. And it's one of the multilingual ones that I think Perry has put in the chat, and it's called Reasons para seguir amando, which means reasons to keep loving. In fact, I'm going to look it up here. Makes more sense. Sorry, I've got my book and my PDF version of my book open. Okay. Reasons para seguir amando. Una misma piedra cortada en la mitad. 10 years waited. 10 days wasted. 10 años por venir. 10 años esperando más. El perro faldero que fui. El quiltro hambriento que no soy. The knowledge that love is never malgastado. The knowledge that love is never wrong. El pichintún de miel que queda en mi lengua. The mountains and their cimientos digging quietly into the truth. El constant plana que eres. El caos total que soy. The nudo and the desnudo and the sanidad of both. The stripes en el cielo despejado over Santiago. Le soleil qui se couche derrière Montmartre. The Mauritian sun. The Indian summer, circadian rhythms, rash decisions, the cycle of pain, suffering, and rebirth. The confidence that I am forgiven, la certidumbre con la que te perdoné, toda la confusión que te quiero aclarar, el maldito hilo que aún sigue vivo, rope, just strong enough to contener the entire ocean, these children of ours, ilegítimos quizás. Fruto del encuentro de dos almas que nunca conocerás. Besos colgados en el aire. Disculpas que te queman la boca por dentro, que no tienes idea cómo pedir. El daño que te hice, que le pido a Dios que algún día pueda reparar. Friendship, trust, understanding. Pass through the center of the earth and around its periphery. Palabritas mías to transcend the atmosphere. Paz de historias, love, grace, y amistad. Thank you. And I'm just going to squeeze in one more because I was told I had time for one more. This is another one that I love, and it is the closing poem of Caroncito. It's my little piece of catharsis that I stuck at the end that I also wrote quite a while after the entire collection was finished. And it's called I Thought of You Today. And I'm very proud of this poem because I managed to squeeze in both the words hippocampus and sternum in it, which was a personal goal of mine. I thought of you today, the strange, bittersweet sensation crashing through my hippocampus. I thought of you, but didn't choke. The memory didn't slice its way through my sternum like it used to, didn't tickle my nose like horsehair, didn't buckle my knees at the menisci. I saw a bunch of flowers today and my thoughts, they scurried right back to you, like children running from the rain, and the pain didn't ricochet throughout the depths of me, didn't erode those tired ends of me, didn't curl my insides into a knot. I thought of you today, and for once, it didn't have me by the throat. I thought of you today, and for once, you didn't have me by the throat. Thank you very much. So that was my set. Those are my poems, all from Caroncito, my collection, which is here. Post-its not included. You can order signed copies from my website. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably see a few pictures kicking about of how they arrive at people's houses with various postcards and goodies. Otherwise, you can buy a copy on Amazon, an ebook copy, a paperback, or if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's completely free. And obviously we're all indie artists, so we live on reviews. So if ever you're interested in buying a copy, I'd be very grateful for a review. But thank you so much, guys, for coming tonight. Thank you, Perry, for organizing all of this. And I'm going to pass on to Perry or whoever's next. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Those were beautiful. It was so wonderful to hear you rather, speaking in multiple languages. That was gorgeous. Now we're going to be hearing from Katy and some pieces from her new book, Postcards from Ragnarok. Over to you.
That's right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I feel like I have an incredibly tough act to follow, following on from these two, but I will try my best. The first poem that I'm going to read to you today comes from my chapbook, Postcards from Ragnarok. Now, to give you a bit of background as to what this book is about, I loved the poetic Edda, the Old Norse, some of the earliest Old Norse poems for a long time. And this collection of poems in Old Icelandic details many different things, but it includes tales of the old gods and tales of Ragnarok, the apocalypse, the end of the world. Now, I think a lot of people get access to this mythology through pop culture, so through Tolkien maybe, through Marvel, and I think these things are all great, but when I read these poems, I felt there was something else in there. I think all poetry is our way of coming to terms with the world as it is, and I felt that these people who lived so many years ago were using these images and these stories to come to terms with the realities of their world in their own way. And so for a long time, I've wanted to find some way of communicating that to the world at large. This summer, I decided to take the plunge and stop just writing fanfic and comedy songs for my friends and start actually writing seriously as a poet. And with that transition came the opportunity to bring that sense that lies within these poems, or try to bring that to life. So that's what this collection tries to do. And so the first poem from that collection really sets the scene for what I'm trying to do here, and sets the scene for Ragnarok. So if you'd like to sit back, and I will tell you a story. This poem is called Balder. Balder was the most beloved of the gods. One night, he saw his own death in a dream. Freya, his mother, begged each creature, plant and rock, to swear an oath to protect him. All agreed, happily, not to harm this child of light, save one. The soft leaf mistletoe did not swear. So young, he had escaped Freya's notice. Balder was immune to all injury. The gods laughed, aimed missiles for sport. None hit their mark. Loki, jealous or just lusting for mischief, discovered the weakness. Mistletoe fashioned a dart. Tricking blind Hörther into aiming, it struck deadly through Balder's heart. There was one final chance. If all would weep for Balder, he could return from the land of the dead. Every man, each beast and plant, rock and metal, ran with sorrow. But Loki refused to give his tears. Balder's fate was sealed, and so began the end of the world. We too know the power of mistletoe. The dart shot blind, the soft leaf deceiving. The wound opens, our words turn to ash, and still we will not weep. Thank you. This is very strange. I love the intimacy of these Zoom readings, but it is quite odd. I think, as Elizabeth said, that we shall continue. So the next poem that I'm going to read you was actually the first poem I had published. It was published by Outcast Press, and it's about, well, it's a poem that I wrote thinking about my experiences of postnatal depression after I had my first child. And it's about trying to hold a normal conversation while being depressed. The poem is called Small Talk. One day, the void will swallow me whole and spit out a pellet of fur and gristle and memory. I'll call to you in your hiking boots. Hi! Aren't the laced roots pretty here? This patch of shade, this loam, this moss, this bark, just the old ant. A smile stretched over what used to be my face. This is almost like old times, I'll say. Remember, we climbed bough over bough, birdsong, and that joke that nearly toppled you. Clean air, lightly sketched hills, just the faintest shadow of wings overhead. Me? Sure, I've passed through acid and been wretched down here into the mulch. I'm a touch more densely knotted than before. If it doesn't make you gag, we'll be just fine. An oak leaf kicks over me as you pass, your eyes fixed on horizons beyond mine. Thank you. The next poem that I'm going to read is another one from Postcards from Ragnarok. And this is a poem about Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir. And it's also a poem about liminality. Sleipnir. Sleipnir was the best of horses. His mother was Loki, who had turned himself into a mare for a single night. Sleipnir carried the gods through the places where sea and sky meet, across the barriers between worlds. At dusk, I will walk along the beach and know that I am no longer confined by sea or shore or earth or sky or smoke or father or mother. I will feel my 8 hooves thundering through the sand and the salt and the spray and the clouds in my mane. I will know the joyful passage from sphere to sphere and back again. How sweet it is to fly across all bounds, to go to hell and know that I was just passing through. Thank you. The next poem I am going to read you was published in Fevers of the Mind, and it's about my toddler and maybe a little bit about Tennyson as well. It's called Shallots. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you serenade your stew. You are starting to anchor yourself in time. You lace it through your fingers like a cat's cradle. I am counterweight and shuttle, complicit. Once those threads are woven, there's no unraveling them. In this moment, the web still floats wide, wide as your arms flung out, as you wind the bobbin up and clap, clap, clap. Thank you. I've got here another poem from Postcards from Ragnarok, and it's about sea monsters, but also about how we tend not to see danger coming until it's right on top of us. And it's called Kraken. Danger is curled in small beginnings, the lock of hair that sparked the feud, the first soft sprig of mistletoe, the first disturbance in the water, before the splintering prow and the torn sail, the spear and the shield dashed into the waves. It's hard to unravel the thread, trace ourselves back to the first paper cut, the first white lie, the first joke that turned sour. By the time we noticed the ripples, we were already in its grip, and a great eye had blotted out the sun. Thank you. I have another poem here. I just want to check with Perry. Have I got time for 2 or for 3 more? 3, okay? Yes, fantastic. That is great news. Okay, so the next poem I'm going to read is called Flight. And that was also published by Fevers of the Mind. Now, this poem was inspired by thinking about movies. I'm one of these terrible people who will, I can't keep quiet when I'm watching a film. You'd hate it. But I have views on movies. One of my views, something I always think is really absurd. You know, when you're watching a film and there's, say, a serial killer or a psycho of some kind, and the victim realizes who they really are, and they say, "Oh, I've seen who you are. You're a monster. You will see justice." And of course, that's always the point at which they get killed, because of course the game's up and they've given too much away. And I always think how silly it is. I think, well, surely what you do in that situation is pretend that everything's normal, say, "Absolutely great. You are obviously the anointed. That's cool. I'm just going to pop to the shops. I'll be back in a minute." And then you make a break for it then. Now, of course, in real life, pretending that everything's normal and biding your time until you can make a break for it is actually what we do if we're lucky. And this poem is about that. Flight. I watch you closely as you speak. A hairbreadth tension webbed across your jaw. I shake out the smile. I say to Best, brace for the recoil. You think you have my heart, but what you hold is a decoy. Beneath your line of sight is a small trembling thing, primed for the faintest rustle in the leaves, the chance to bolt for daylight. One more beat, I'll be flushed out, a trail of blood and feathers in my wake. Thank you. Right, this is my penultimate poem. I love the word penultimate. I don't know about you. This poem was published in Selkirk Station, and I think it has the dubious honour of being the only cheerful poem that I've ever written. Although it's maybe not that cheerful. See what you think. Morning after. The waves clap their hands. New fires ignite in the firmament. A single flower blooms in the heart of the forest for the first time in 1,000 years. A gentle tide rolls over the crest of the hill and warms the whole street. I turn the new day over in my palm. If I press it too close, it'll vanish in a shower of sparks and bright pink feathers. You adjust the sheets, brush away contented crumbs. It's beyond me how you don't seem to notice that it's stardust you're stirring into your tea. Thank you. And now, my final poem I actually am going to read this from my copy of Postcards because it was only as I was reading my first poem about Balder, I realised it would be terribly unfair to start the story of Ragnarok and not let you know how it ended. So this story, I'm going to take a glass of sip of water. I actually had no voice at all yesterday, so I'm quite relieved you have as much of my voice as you do. This poem is called Idavol, and it's about what happens after the world has ended. After Ragnarok, nothing but the sea shall remain. There will be silence until, as slow as the dawn on a winter's morning, the earth will come up from the waters. Vidar and Vali, Modi and Magni, children of the old gods, shall return to Idavol, where their parents' home once stood. Blind Hodr and Balder will join them, released from the land of the dead. They will sit together, reminisce about things past, how the world ended, how a serpent encircled the earth, how the sun disappeared into the jaws of a wolf. They will find the gilded chess pieces scattered by their parents. My dream is that one day we too will sit on some far veranda, talk about old times, gather the fragments that lie gleaming in the grass as the earth gently rises, golden in the twilight. Thank you very much. And that marks the end of my set. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was great to hear some of the poems from your new book. I posted the link back in the chat for anybody who missed it before Katie's set.
Oh yes, actually that reminds me. Thank you, Perry. Yep, a Postcards from Ragnarok is available on Amazon, or if you would like a copy from me with some very poorly handwritten dedication, but a rather beautiful wax seal, please do find me on Twitter and send me a DM, and I'd be happy to sort that out for you. Great, thank you.
All right, and that brings us to my set, and I'm not very good at preamble, so I'm just going to jump right into it. This first poem is from Meditations for the Dead and Dying, which is my first chapbook to ever be published and just came out yesterday. So, and before I forget, since I'm posting everybody else's links, I'll throw that in the chat. Just give me a second. I'm not as set up for my set as I am for everybody else's. Sorry about that. Here we go. All right. So this is the first poem in the chapbook. It's called Growing Pains. It's after I Sing the Body Electric, especially when my power's out, by Andrea Gibson. Just so everybody knows, all of my stuff is quite dark and quite raw. So if you feel the need to step away, there's no hard feelings. But yes, this is Growing Pains. Like a snake, I shed the skin you so graciously shoved me into. Molting this visage gifted to me in your benevolence, my body grows too bold for the mold in which you encase me. Angry fissures spiderweb over my body in fractured magnificence. Hatching from my porcelain prison, I rise through the wreckage, jagged edges catching fresh pink skin, breaking flaming valleys filled with shadows into broken arms, rippling muscles bulging under tattered limbs, aching to taste freedom from their cells. My spine stands sharp, ripping the seams sewn too tight to breathe, ribs creaking and cracking as you take me in a few more inches. Thin skin stretched tight across shoulders painted red with thrown away words, mea culpa, mea culpa. Your tongue strikes deep, but my blood runs deeper, bursting through lacerations, pouring forth from my pores. It drips from my mouth as I scream and release. waves of pain crashing against delicate flesh as cruel ecstasy throbs in every nerve. It hurts to become. The next two pieces are from a chapbook that I'm currently querying, so it's not out in the world yet, but maybe someday. This chapbook is about kind of trauma and growth and mental illness and kind of reclamation of oneself through those things. So just be aware of that with these next two poems. So this first one was first published in Melbourne Culture Corner, and it was my first piece that was ever published. It's called First Tears. I wonder what it feels like the first time you cry. It must be like falling in love for the first time. I'm 8 years old, falling in love on the playground. Her name is Naomi, the most beautiful creature I have ever seen. It takes me 2 weeks to tell her I love her. She says, girls like boys. I feel my heart rip from my chest, invaded by the hollowness of careless words. I wonder what it feels like the first time your body betrays you. It must be like seeing a monster for the first time. I'm 13 when I find out that the world doesn't care who you are. There are monsters everywhere. It takes me 2 weeks to be able to sleep by myself again. My mother asks me what's wrong. I feel him rip my stomach from my abdomen, drowned in the emptiness left in place of stolen things. I wonder what it feels like the first time drops of yourself fall to the floor. It must be like giving up for the first time. I'm 19 when I realize that you can lose yourself completely. It takes me 2 weeks to get out of bed. I just want this to end. I feel my mind rip from my body, consumed by a chasm of hopeless thoughts. I wonder what it feels like the first time you cry. It must be like finding truth for the first time. I'm 24 when I learned that babies don't cry. It takes them 2 weeks to form tears. My friend asks me what that means. I say, it means that's how long it takes for the world to rip the salt from our eyes and leave us with a vacancy, those parts of ourselves that roll off the sides of our cheeks. The next one I'm going to do is called Crimson. I first performed this at the Full House Literary Festival Mental Health Open Mic, which was a super fun experience. It was great. It talks a little bit more towards mental illness. So this is Crimson. My chest closes itself, lungs crushed under the weight of empty nights spent making snow angels in the cold. Imprinted for a second, a vision of what we were before the indifference of the world cut a little too deep. Your hands wander along my back, and I wonder at how vast and empty I must be to not feel a thing, to shudder under soft fingertips, stroking away the loneliness of the evening, recoiling from lips pressed against burning skin. In the comfortable silence of myself, I stroke sharp edges, swept into neat piles in the corner, ripping palms on shattered stained glass windows. I trip on a question and tear a hole in my stomach, dripping crimson onto my shoes. I tell the world I painted them myself, scrub them every night until my fingers bleed new masterpieces. I'm too tender for this world. All right, so we're going to go back to meditations now. This one is one of my favorite. These next two are probably two of my favorite ones from the chapbook. This first one I'm going to do is called A Modest Feast. Perverse conductors of power and gain gorge themselves on our bodies, licking bloodied chops as they stare down at our skeletons, dancing on gilt strings, jeweled chains hanging loosely from chipped ankles as we lurch and clatter into piles of spent ivory. Our minds were stained by the machination of our lives, and it is our time to feast, to sate starving stomachs, cut our teeth on gold-plated bones as we tear at soft flesh, chewing fat until it sticks to our tongues, coating our palates thick with rebellious words. We burned their factories, danced in the flames, and at bloody dawn, they stuck their heads in piles of ashes as hungry armies of the not quite dead spilled over the horizon. They never saw us coming. The next one I'm going to do is the last piece in Meditations for the Dead and Dying. It was first published in Outcast Press back in August, I believe. So thank you for that. I appreciate everybody at Outcast for this one. This is called New Leaves. I love new leaves and the smell of blood as life tumbles forward, tearing into the world from heaving wombs, umbilical cords wrapped around slender necks as young lungs struggle to take their first breath. And cherry blossoms opening in fragrant spring, impatient heads crowning through fragile buds, bursting forth in brutal inception, thin seals wrenched open with ignorant disregard. And red stains upon pink skin, tender and screaming as fresh air rakes its nails along naked nerves. The remnants of a torn vessel cling to raw flesh, glistening in the carnage left in the wake of creation. And sweet sap bleeding through cracked bark, flowing free through valleys gouged into faces of unwavering trunks, splitting as new growth forces its way into the world, green and sticky. And the violence and beauty of becoming, witnessing the sight of a child ripped from the stomach of its mother, leaving her stretched and hollow and bloody. There really is nothing more stunning than new leaves. The last two I have for you are some new pieces. So these are not anywhere yet. So a little sneak peek for what's coming down the pipeline. This first one is a little bit of a comment on, as someone who's like a female creature in the world, just kind of the unwanted looks and kind of gaze that you can experience sometimes in the world from a different perspective. This is called Reading Rosetti on a Park Bench. Her pores drip syrup down skin soft as peaches, and I just want to kiss the salt off her sun-stained shoulders. Her laughter tumbles forward from licorice lips, and I just want to rinse my mouth of the sweet spice of her tongue. Her fat berry blue eyes burst with candy tears, and I just want her on the backs of my teeth, feel her sugar linger in the rot of my molars. I'll bet you bleed like cherry pie. And my last one for today is called Reduction. The reduction of a person to a thing possessed, taken, rips the mind from the flesh, leaves jagged holes in a body tainted by violent disregard. Dirty knees and stained skirts forcing the mortification of the soul. Blood pumps through filthy veins and air fills putrid lungs as the self withers into a bezoar of a thing. A coalescence of sharp edges that rake against our insides like nails on open sores. Our cavities fill with bile, acid, and blood until we choke on our own bitter humors. And that's it for me for today. So thank you, everyone. The next reader that we have is Shiksha Dheda.
Thank you. That was a lovely set, Perry, actually. So for me, I'd just like to say firstly that it's amazing that so many people actually interested in hearing what we have to say. When I started submitting to journals earlier this year, I didn't think that people would want to read what I had to say. So to see that people actually hear to listen, to participate, to just sort of immerse ourselves in these words, which have been so lovely so far. I think that's very heartwarming for me. So today I would be reading all my poems from my debut poetry collection, Washed Away, which is this one, and it's available on Amazon. I would love to have done personalized copies, but shipping to and from South Africa is an actual nightmare. So when people do order the copy, I send them a personalized printable bookmark. You can get as many as you want. So if you want one for every single poem with a quote, I'll do that for every single poem with a quote. So yeah, please consider buying one if you can. Also, if there are financial issues, you can contact me and we'll see what we can do about that. This collection has been split up into 3 sections. And the first section sort of discusses the onset of my own personal mental illness. The middle section kind of says how the disorder is sustained. And the final section discusses how I view a future living with mental illness. So from the first section, which is called soap lathering, which has been likened to hand washing, I'll be reading a poem called Is the Door Locked? And this poem was published way back in January by Brave Voices magazine. So is the door locked? Checking the locked doors once, washing the dirty dishes, checking the locked doors once again, washing the linen once again, washing the dishes once again, checking to see if the windows are shut, checking to see if the taps are closed, checking to see if the windows are shut, checking to see if the taps are closed, checking the locked doors, counting the steps from one room to the next. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is the door locked? Oh no, I must count again. 1, 2, 3. Are the windows shut? Completely shut? 1, 2. I'm sure I locked the door. 1. Let me check again. Checking the locked doors once, checking the locked doors once again. And this poem basically just discusses the cyclic nature of obsessive compulsive disorder, how your mind kind of plays tricks on you. You know something isn't reality, but you can't convince yourself that it isn't. Your mind is your own worst enemy. I'm sure many people listening in can relate. The next poem has kind of a similar theme, and it was published in Handcraft Hub's inaugural issue called Fungus, and it's called Fungi. It basically discusses how intrusive thoughts, voices, for lack of a better phrase, sprout from each other. So fungi. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. Afraid to allow an open wound to be exposed to the air outside, rushing to a basin, I soak my hands in a thick, soapy foam, washing, scrubbing, 2 minutes. Waiting for the voices to quieten, I continue, washing and scrubbing to block them out. 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. My hands burning, gentle stinging, now on fire. 10 fingers, palms covered, bruises everywhere, all exposed to dirt now. Only the cuts block out the voices, voices forever whispering, voices that scream when I see dirt. So that was the 2 poems that I chose to read from the first section. And I'd like to promptly move on to the second section because I feel like we don't need to discuss the onset of mental illnesses that much. The next one is Deadly Companion, which discusses how sometimes, even though our mental illnesses isolate us in some ways, we find solace in them or we find companionship in them. And this one was published in Poetically Mag. Deadly Companion. Often my mind and I discuss you, how time would be endless if you didn't exist, how I would be different if you did not stealthily enter through the back door of my hustle thoughts and hide behind the curtains of my flaws, or if you had not totally burned through all my other traits and remained like the sole firefly buzzing through a night sky of dark thoughts, concentrating on your being when I'm in solitude and when I'm amidst the clobbering clownish clowns. I find that you alone are my philosopher, my friend, my enemy, my problem, my strength, my weakness, my sole constant companion, demolishing all bonds that bind me, creating invisible, impermeable boundaries. Around me, I am caged, in here, like in this dark, infinite room with you, like a prisoner, and a timid, constantly dripping tap. Thank you. The next poem I'd like to read is Failure. And this is a very emotive poem for me because it speaks about an incident that happened last year, I think about June 2020, when someone needed my help, someone very close to me, and I couldn't help them because of my OCD. So it's called Failure. I see you laying there, face smashed into the cold tiled floor, your body limp, empty almost of all motion. Your arms twitch a little. I want to pick you up from the filthy floor, carry you to safety. I know you trust me to do that, but I cannot. I feel frozen, in shock, in desperation, in confusion. I don't know how to pick you up. Physically, I know I can. Mentally, I know I cannot. I haven't touched another person in months. I think I've forgotten how to. I haven't held another body in years. I don't know how to. Help comes eventually. You're safe now. Your head is bleeding somehow. I can't do anything to help. I stand in the furthest corner, away from the mayhem, away from your blood, away from my failure. From all the days I've lived with this disorder, I think I hate this one the most. So thank you very much for listening to that very real poem. The last section now, I chose slightly more hopeful poems because this is how I kind of envision the future, living with a mental illness. So some of the poems are a little pessimistic and some are a little more on the optimistic side. So I chose more of the latter. This one is called If I Ever, and it was featured on Fevers of the Mind. If I ever wander within the realms of fantasy, the somberness of your voice will beckon me back to reality. If I ever get lost in the sheets of disillusionment, the gentleness of your touch will waken sleeping hope. If I ever roam around helplessly in the endless maze of life's predicaments, the exuberance of your smile will brighten the dark road, guiding me back home. But if I ever forget you, who, what, where you are, let the unsung hymn that you kindle in the depths of your bosom sing loudly to my silence. For I, being blinded by reality, spurned by fantasy, will grope onto each rhythmless and clumsy note and find my way back to you. The next one, which kind of has a similar theme, is called Stuck. And here goes, Stuck. Here, in my small bubble of reality, I tend to get a little obsessed. I obsess over what I clean. I obsess over what I buy. I get stuck on cleaning what I buy and buying what I cannot clean. I obsess over what I cook. I obsess over what I eat. I eat what I cook, and I only cook how much I eat. I obsess over how I clean when I cook. I obsess over what I cook after I clean. The cycle of cleaning the gloves before I wear them, cleaning my hands before I wash the gloves, cleaning the gloves to wash the other gloves before I wash my hands, to wear the clean gloves, to clean the dirty gloves, and you were the first beautiful, worthwhile thing that I got stuck on. The thorns of your clarity, stability, piercing the bubble of isolation I had surrounded myself in. Your presence as simple and necessary as the first rays of spring, falling on wilted tree branch, saddened, frozen in this never-ending winter. Thank you. The last poem I would like to read is actually the last poem in my debut collection, which is called Dear Childhood. And I think it speaks to how a lot of us would like to go back to the innocence or ignorance or both that we had when we were children, when we thought that we could do so much more than what we think we can now. So here goes. Dear childhood, come back. Take me back to a time where the nudity of my thoughts weren't embraced in the cloak of disturbed age. Come back. Take me back to a time where I didn't tightrope walk on the boundaries of normalcy, breathe within the restraints of my mind. Come back. Take me back to a time where I could weave dreams freely, under the shade of trees, thinking that I am unimaginably limitless. Thank you so much. That was my set, and I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, please do consider buying a copy of Washed Away, and contact me if there's any financial problems or anything surrounding this. And also, if you just like to discuss the poems or mental illness or OCD, anything, I'm always up for chat. Thank you very much. Back to you, Perry.
Thank you so much, Shiksha. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing readings today. It's been lovely to be able to listen to all of your work. So now we're going to get into the Q&A portion of the event. So for those of you who want to be able to come off mute and ask your question verbally, there's a reactions button just in the bottom of your screen. If you click that, you'll see a raise hand button. If you click that, then we'll be able to call on you in order of people raising their hands. If you don't want to verbalize your question, you can always send it in the chat to myself if you want to stay anonymous, or just to the general chat if you don't mind having your name attached to the question. So to begin with, we have a question from Courtney Gray, who could not be here today, but still wanted to ask an open question to the poets. So anybody who feels like they would like to answer this question can feel free to. Courtney wanted to know, how do you think humans would be if writing books, diaries, entries about their trauma or experiences had never come to fruition?
Something that's really important to my artistic practice. And like, I go through phases of going out and doing workshops a lot. I think it's really important that we all have ownership of our own stories. Like I always want everyone in my workshops to be able to tell the hard story, the thing that they're always thinking about. I never want them to be in a position that they have to. I worry sometimes that as our artistic community, we create a culture where we ask people to drag up the trauma again and again just to create publishable material, put stuff on stages, whatever they're doing. And for me, I think what is most important is the community, rather than like however you measure your artistic practice is valid. But I think where we process trauma is by talking about it and passing it backwards and forwards a little bit and sharing it. And I think if we can't write it down, we will just find ways to tell our stories differently. And whether that's a visual practice or whether that just becomes, we sing more songs and we don't write it down, maybe that's okay too.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So in a former life, before I discovered writing, back in my 20s, I used to spend a lot of my weekends pretending to be a Viking. Call it living history, call it historical reenactment. I put on chainmail, I fought with a spear, I made stuff. But the thing that I used to enjoy the most, really, about all of it, it wasn't the fighting really, or the making walls out of cow dung. It was actually at the end of the day when everybody would gather round the campfire. And the thing is that it was actually people in this hobby from all walks of life, not necessarily people, from one background, people from all over the country. And what was so wonderful is that people would take that time to tell their stories. So sometimes we'd just talk, sometimes people would sing, sometimes we created our own lore, if you like. So the time that so and so did the thing, and with each telling it would get more and more embellished. And what I felt that was happening there is that there was this kind of communal sharing space that had been built without the intention of looking at publications or audiences or anything. It was a very organic thing. And something I'm quite passionate about in my practice is trying to create that sense of the campfire. And the people who see me basically living on Twitter, that is what I believe it is. It's a campfire for the modern age. But I think, as Ben says, as humans, we are narrative creatures, and we will make our narratives and process our narratives with whatever tool or medium comes to hand. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Cool question though. I'm super impressed. That was cool.
Can I add something, if I can answer sort of directly to what, if I understood her question correctly, if people found no way, the written way we're assuming is the most common, I don't know, to communicate their trauma, we're talking years back in history, then I believe people would have died out. It would have been survival of the fittest, and only the conquerors would have had their stories told. But then humanity would have ended up dying out. But I do think, echoing what Katy and Ben said, invariably, even if it wasn't conscious, even if it wasn't intentional, there would be visual art, there would be tribal dance, there would be rituals, traditions that sort of were encrusted in society, in civilization, that would be a way of telling the plight of women, the plight of people who are different, the plight of, whoever it was who went through trauma on the collective level and on the individual level. So I think humanity unfortunately is formed and forged by change, and a huge part of change is unfortunately trauma. So it's hard to imagine a world in which that would be the case. On a personal level, I don't think I would be here if I hadn't have had that outlet, and I think probably a lot of us poets are the same. But as Ben says, for me, it's also a sense of, it can get a little bit just depressing for a bunch of already depressed poets to sit around hearing poetry about depression. So it's also good that it's not the only thing, and that we don't feel pressured that this is what we need to be edgy and this is what we need to find our place. Like I write about depression, anxiety, about postpartum depression, particularly in motherhood, but I also write humorous poems about it and fiction about it. And I think there's also something to be said of, if we're talking about the place of poetry, Michael Chang, the poet, actually put something on Twitter once, which literally blew my mind, which was that poetry doesn't have to be true. And as Ben said, we don't have to feel the pressure that this somehow needs to be true to what I went through, or it can have an element of that. It can have a little shade of what I know, but it can be fictional as well. No one's checking dates and details. I don't think necessarily the poet's role is to always tell the truth. And if they need, and if that's their way to process trauma, then that's fantastic, but that's not necessarily within the job description of a poet, I would say, which has taken the question on a tangent, forgive me, but yeah, that's what I think.
Those are excellent answers. And yeah, I would just echo what all three of you have said, is that I feel like we have, throughout history, even before written word was a thing, different groups had ways of expressing these things. So I think that part of being a human is telling your story, right? So I think that that's just kind of inherently enmeshed in what we are. Yeah, so we have a couple questions for specific poets here. Ben, you're first up on the list.
Give me.
The question is, your writing is so autobiographical or based in stories of people you know. To what extent is truth in poetry essential? Does the poet have a responsibility to be the truth teller at all times?
No. I would argue, and I feel like any MFAs in the audience are going to eat me for it, but I believe that for performance poetry particularly, there's a lot of merit in exploring autofiction. So I think that there is nuance to a situation that will shine through honesty. So in one of my poems earlier, I talked about in therapy, there's the 4-room apartment that I live in. And sort of existing there with a partner is something that's really important, is a really happy memory. But that experience doesn't necessarily tie in, except for this funny anecdote about how the fucking shower never works. So for me, lived experience creates better storytelling in the sense that we have access to more metaphors. Something that I'm very wary about all the time is when I do workshops, universities, I get to that inevitably run into some 18-year-old hothead that loves his Bukowski or loves his Burroughs or whatever, and like just wants to talk drugs with me. And like, go for your life, man. I don't care, but don't feel a need to do that for your art. Like, if that's your interest and like the two are happening at the same time, whatever, I don't care. But also don't chuck yourself under a bus just because you want to write about it. I think particularly amongst white boys in my workshops, that there is a propensity to replace where they feel they should be battled with creating their own struggles, right? So where privilege prevents certain kinds of interactions, what they do instead is they manufacture problems. And it's something I've definitely done. So I'm not trying to take a moral high horse. I'm just saying it would be cool if some of them could work it out a little bit faster than I do. But yeah, do I think the storyteller is in there, needs to be inherently truthful? No, but I believe sincerity helps a lot. There are some, don't get me wrong, there's some fascinating artists out there that speak of the absurd and the surreal, but I would argue that autofiction is best created from a place of sincerity, where you're trying to create a message, or not necessarily like a moral, but you're trying to communicate an idea. And I believe that comes back to like our like there needs to be an inherent contract as a poet or a performer about like, am I getting up there to serve as some kind of narcissistic group therapy situation where I get to talk and you all get to sit and listen, or am I trying to impart something that's entertaining, or am I trying to impart something that I believe people can genuinely benefit from? And yeah, I would argue that through like 90% of my work, I aspire to that. There's bits where I don't, and some of like, there's been shows and stuff that I've written that I deliberately rejected to see what it would be like. But yeah, broadly, I think poets are best served by taking what they know, because everyone has a story that I haven't heard before, right? So I don't care what your context is. If you can tell me that story, I'm going to be fucking fascinated the whole time. And yeah, I think sincerity in communication, like in any other kind of like communication interpersonal that we have, yeah, I think that works a lot.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was an excellent answer. Elizabeth, we have one for you that's come in. They wanted to ask, how do you write using two languages to make one poem, and what advice would you give to someone wanting to do something similar?
Okay, that's a fantastic question, for which I don't really have an answer, I'm afraid, because writing some poems, I speak a few languages, and some poems, depending on what they're about, will appear in one language or another. But what will often happen, in fact, I think it probably is rooted in the way I speak. I'm Mauritian, so I grew up bilingual, trilingual, French, English, Creole, and I learned Spanish and Portuguese later. When I'm speaking, anybody who knows me in real life, I jump from one language to the other. So it's only natural that when I'm writing, especially very personal poetry, that I'm going through the lines and then suddenly it can be something as simple as I don't remember how to say that in English, or it just sounds better in French, or there's a word for it in Spanish that it isn't quite in English, and it just needs to go there. I recently wrote a poem for a chapbook that I'm actually querying at the moment on postpartum, postnatal depression, motherhood, marriage. And I wrote it originally with pieces in French, pieces of dialogue in Spanish, sorry. And I read it again. And although it was accurate, if I could say, it just didn't work. It was lacking the weight of the content of the poem. It was about grieving a miscarriage. And for some reason, it just did not work for that piece. I left it for a bit and came back to it. And then I realized that it needed to be written in French. I don't know, is it because the French are more depressed than Latin Americans? I have no idea, but for some reason it had that sort of, it worked that way. I'm a firm believer, which is one of the reasons why I love language, is that certain things work better in certain languages. Language is an ambassador of culture, and the cultures, like I said in my poem, for example, the French have no word for kindness. It's very telling about French culture, which is aspires to very high standards at all times, but doesn't have a lot of compassion in it. Whereas Spanish is exuberant, it has love and passion and war and revolution and everything like that. And so it's well suited to explore those themes. And when there are those different elements in a poem, well, because I have that sort of the tools of those different languages to use, I will use them. It's like a painter who will change between a small brush to a thicker brush to a sponge, depending on what they need to communicate on their canvas. And I've forgotten the second bit of the question. What advice would I have? Well, I would say, if assuming you already speak some languages or have some knowledge of it, just experiment with it and read as much as you can in the other language, because then you will find themes and certain elements that speak to you, that you say, hang on, this is what I feel, and this is part of my story, as Ben mentioned, my personal story. This is something that I can communicate, and here is the tool that I need for it. This is the piece I've been lacking. To experiment as much as possible, and even if you don't speak or you're not fluent in another language, I think, just try, throw yourself into it. You don't have to be. Language doesn't belong to anyone. You don't have to be fluent or have a great command of it to try it out. And you will feel yourself if it works or not. And also surround yourself with people who speak and appreciate other languages, who can be your sounding board if you have doubts. I have a whole bunch of Mexicans and Chileans who I'm constantly sending stuff to at all hours of the night. Thank goodness there's a huge time difference in saying, does this work or does it not? And they're very honest. And, they've said to me before, this is fantastic, I'm crying my eyes out, or I'm crying my eyes out because it makes no sense. So, it's really important to surround yourself with not just creative people, but creative people who can appreciate what you're trying to make, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, whoever you are. Well done, that's a fantastic question.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was an excellent answer. That's very interesting to hear about how, as someone who really only speaks one language, it's very interesting to see how you can add layers to your ideas and your works by integrating those other languages. That's very interesting. Katy, we have one for you here. Where did the inspiration behind Ragnarok come from? What was it that drew you to Norse mythology over any other mythology?
Ooh, that is a really, really good question. So let's see where I can start. I actually ended up studying Old Norse at university. So I read a lot of these poems in the original Icelandic, and I learned a bit of Icelandic in the same way that not so much that I could speak it, but in the same way that some people might learn Latin or something, so that at the time I could read and translate. And at the time I was really immersed in dreams of another time and another world, I suppose. And actually, at the time, with hindsight, I think I was probably looking for an escape from day-to-day reality. And I started on a literature degree, and I was actually finding that possibly a lot of the stuff I was having to process was a little close to the bone at the time. And so I went down this little cul-de-sac of looking at old Norse, Old English. I did a bit of archaeology, a bit of manuscript studies, and it was really interesting, but it was all at a remove. But of course, as I read particularly the Old Norse poems, what I realized that this kind of draws me back to something I was sitting on my hands so as not to interject during what Ben was saying about truth. I think there are two types of truth in literature. I think there is literal personal truth, as in this thing happened to me, but there's also emotional truth. And I think the thing that I found really incredible about this poetry is that even though the imagery and the stories and everything were ostensibly very alien, there was still a current of emotional truth to it. Like if you one of the images that comes up and up again in this collection is the Midgard Serpent, which is like the serpent that circles the earth. And talking about how people come to terms with their trauma without writing it down. My theory is that story was it's it's a way of talking about the horizon, right? So, you know, seafaring culture, seafaring's dangerous. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of stuff goes wrong out there. And so this idea of, you know, what you think is the horizon actually being something that's kind of potentially really dangerous, it possibly speaks to people in that cultural context, right? But then think about it again. You know, they imagined that the world was flat and that the sea was a circle, and that this serpent, the thing that is potentially dangerous, is also the thing that's holding it all together, right? Because if the serpent goes, then what's going to happen to the world? And so the more I looked into these, you know, looked into all these different images, the more I felt that they actually sparked a sort of metaphorical conversation within me, and they helped me find different ways of expressing that emotional truth. So, you know, some of my poems, as you'll see, are, you know, straight from the heart, but often I like to look at stories and you know, story structures, and see how they can pull out that grain of emotional truth in a way that maybe just talking about my experiences directly would do. And so yes, I'm not sure if I'm still on the thread of the original question, but in a nutshell, that is what drew me to that particular mythology. And thank you for, yeah, excellent question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. Our next question is for Shiksha. They were wondering how you can write using such compelling language when the content is so heavy and dark, and how you find a way to capture such harsh imagery that's in such a perfectly written way.
Thanks, Perry. That's a wonderful question. I think, and somebody asked me this as well. They were like, how do you feel discussing, you know, difficult topics? And I actually told them that I think it's tougher for me not to discuss it, because if I'm living this every single day and it's my reality, what else would I predominantly write about? Because it's encompassed my life. It's something I wake up with. It's something I go to sleep thinking about. So when I think of myself, and unfortunately at this point, a lot of what I define myself as is defined by mental illness at this point, there isn't really much else to talk about. So if I had to write about something else, which I do sometimes, but if I had to write about other things, it feels like everything kind of leads back to mental illness. Even if I'm not directly talking about it, it feels like under the surface, it's just like one layer away from what I want to really say anyways. So I think it's easy for me to write about it because I feel like it's encompassed my life. So what else would I write about? I'm not sure if people relate to that or what else, but that's how I view it. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shiksha. And there's a question here for myself. Have you found writing poetry like the Pieces and Meditations cathartic, or that in writing you discover things about yourself and your experiences along the way? That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both, I guess. I like to approach poetry. As like almost like an exploration of an idea or a trauma or a consideration. So it's like you go into it and you say, how does this thing hurt, or how does this thing make me happy, or how does this thing affect me in this way, and then explore that honestly. Like just say, why does it make me hurt, and how does that connect to other things in my life, or other things in other people's lives, or other things like in the world? Like, are there bigger things that I can connect this to? And just really having an honest dialogue with myself about these different things in interesting ways. Like, and I do find that especially with this new chapbook that I'm working on, a lot of it is working through like trauma and mental illness that I've gone through in the past. And it was very cathartic to write, but the thing that really kind of shocked me about writing it was I never cried when I wrote it. Like I was going through all of these things that had happened to me, and I did not at any point kind of feel so emotionally overwhelmed with the writing. It was almost like talking to a friend about it or talking to a therapist about it. It was very interesting. So yeah, it's definitely an exploration for me. Like the poem is not written when I first start writing it. I have to explore the idea before it can actually come to be what it wants to be, for sure. But yeah, thank you for that question. Juan has his hand up. You can unmute yourself and ask your question if you'd like to.
Hi there. First of all, congratulations to everybody. It's really, really lovely, all your work. And this is for anyone who would like to answer me. How vulnerable, how you say, do you feel each time you show your work? The first time you show your work, anything that you write, how vulnerable do you feel to do it when you do that?
Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that one. For a lot of the stuff that I perform, I do quite regularly. So I've been doing the first poem I did tonight, I've been doing since about like 2014 or so. And it's done distance. It's gone much further than I ever expected any of my poetry to. Where I'm most likely to be vulnerable is like I'll find quite safe events that I feel comfortable being vulnerable at, right? And I have over my career got myself in lots and lots of trouble for shooting my mouth off about what I would describe as problems in my like local scene. And I did this one set probably before the pandemic, so probably would have been 2018 or whatever. And just like there was a poet friend of mine. I was like, man, I need you here for this thing. I'm gonna shoot my mouth off. I don't know what happens. Maybe I'll walk away from this for a bit after if this goes really awfully. So yeah, sometimes like I'll get up and I'll take my little suitcase full of baggage up there with me and be like, look, like, again, like, I think there's a point to discussing this. I want my art to lead conversations. And what that means tonight is that we need to talk about what's in my little bag that I carry everywhere with me. But a lot of the other times, like particularly, like I love poems. I wrote a project recently that was called Cardboard Cutout Boyfriend. And the whole thing is just a book of love poems about no one in particular, just because I wanted to write some. So that kind of stuff, like I'm very happy to get up and just do it at a moment's notice, and it doesn't require anything from me. But yeah, just like sometimes I'll real wind myself up and be like, look, no, like this is where I can actually contribute to conversations. This is where I can, make the calls. I've been around long enough that I understand the consequences of my actions, and I'd rather me get in trouble than some kid that's working themselves out. So yeah, really depends. And yeah, just like a couple of others talked about, like I find like, obviously resolved trauma is much easier to talk about on stage for me than unresolved trauma. As a general rule, there's still going to be days where stuff that I've really sat with will just be a bit rattled for me. But broadly speaking, most of the poems where I'm going to get up and talk about trauma, I've sat with for a long time. And now I'm like, all right, cool. Like I can make this piece a performance that isn't just for my benefit. I can make it for other people. And I think that's really important for me and my artistic practice anyway.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that last point there, where it's like, how can I take this thing that's so personal to me and bring it to other people? I found like the content of my poetry is always very kind of heavy. And so lots of people have asked me similar questions, like, don't you feel like very vulnerable getting up and saying this? And the answer is actually usually no. Like it's at a point that I've crafted this into a piece of art that I want to show people. I want to be able to connect with people over. Like Ben said, sometimes, some days it's like really hard when it's something like super personal that I've written. And it's like, I just don't have the spoons for this today. But like for myself, my work is always has threads of other experiences that I've seen or heard about, or friends' experiences or families' experiences. And I just have this almost disconnect from my work after I've written it, that it's just like, this isn't a bearing of myself necessarily. This is an offering of a point of connection for people. And it just feels very kind of warming almost to be able to have people interact with my work.
If I can just bounce off what you just said now, Perry, about it being a point of connection, a lot of what I write is very raw, and is very close to the bone. Inside the bone is pure marrow, and it's but I think that there's a little bit for some things of the, okay, it's written, it's out, it's no longer the pain, like the tears have dried on the page and now they become ink, and now it's an artwork. But I think that also there comes a point where, for example, for me, writing about motherhood and miscarriage and postpartum depression and things like that, I read what I would like to read. I write what I would like to read, in the sense, not the style or the technique or anything like that, but in the sense that I hope someone out there can read this and be like, oh, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one who's thought about throwing their child out the window. I'm not the only one who, don't do it, guys, but like, I'm not the only one who feels like this. I'm not, it can be one line. That's the beauty of poetry. It can be half a line that just, okay, you're not alone, that makes you feel like you're not alone in the world. And if my desire to achieve that is so much more important, is so much stronger than any regard I would have for, oh, what's anyone going to think about me? And also, I think there comes a point, like, I've written so many poems about my vagina at this point, like, you kind of just get a bit desensitized to the whole thing. So it's like, they can read about my intimate parts, they can read about my depression, they can read about all these things. It's not now that I'm going to feel squeamish and vulnerable about it. At least for my situation, that's how I felt. I think Juan wants to add something to his question.
Well, as soon as you finish a poem, it's still yours or it's everyone's?
Ooh, the ultimate question.
That one. Oh my goodness. Is it ever ours or is it ever any? I don't know. I think it depends on the poem. It depends on the poet. There's so many poems I've written that no one's ever going to see, because even if they might be good or not, they just needed to come out. But I think it depends. It depends on I would say more the poem than the poet. Because sometimes you write something, or you go into writing something not expecting it to be any good, and then you're like, well, hey, this is amazing. So I think it really depends on the poem and on how you've come to it. Have you come to it with an idea? Have you come to it just because it needs to come out? Have you come to it crafting it from pieces of something else? But I think that a poem, ultimately, if I can be a bit philosophical, belongs to the reader. At the end of the day, the poem belongs to whoever's reading. In the same way a piece of music belongs to the listener. I've listened to something and been like, oh, this is such a motivational piece of music, and someone else has been like, this is so depressing. It's the same thing. 3 different people will read the same poem and pick up different things from it. So I think the poem ultimately belongs to the reader. When it gets to the reader in its stage of development, what stage of development gets to the reader, that I think is up to the poet, obviously. I don't know if that answers your question.
Katy, do you want to say your thing first?
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, no, I'd love to follow on from that. I think for me, I'm always writing about something that's personal, because even though I think my writing might seem a little more detached, or some of it might seem a little more detached, telling stories, there's always for me a grain of truth at the heart of it, because otherwise I don't see the point in writing it, really. Like, I'm never going to write something just because it'll sound pretty on the page, or you know, because it'll get me a certain whatever. My aim as a writer always is to communicate something to the reader about our shared experience in that moment. And however I'm doing it, whatever I'm using to communicate that, that is exactly always what I'm aiming to do. And I'm doing that thing with my hands a lot. And so if I always feel like if I can get it out into the world, and if just one person can say, hey, yeah, that resonates, actually, I've been there, you've put that in a way that I never thought before, then I feel like, my work here is done. So I mean, there is some vulnerability in that, because obviously I'm always sharing a part of myself, and I guess probably more at the stage where, when you're trying to publish something and you're aware that somebody else will be judging it maybe in a way as fit for publication. That's probably the most nerve-wracking bit, because you realize that people are going to read it in a different light, which is part of the process. And I, as the new editor of my own little interactive art zine, I now Void Space, I now sort of see that from the other side. Yeah. And it's really tough, but but when it actually comes to getting something out into the heart of a reader who's just coming to it fresh, it's actually quite a joyous thing, I think.
Yeah, interesting. No, I think all of that's really good perspectives. I was just going to chime in and say, like, I know it's almost habitual for most of us at this point to sort of talk about like a poem as a child, but I think once it's out in the world, it's sort of like it's a bit of a grown-up, and it starts having its own friends, and it starts having its own interactions with other people. And I'll always have my relationship with like a couple of my poems that are out and about, but I know they do other things for other people. And sometimes like they pay it back. Like a couple years ago, the night before a gig, I'd been beaten up. And I was super sketchy about doing this gig. And I was like, oh, it's in this nice part of town, and I've got like a black eye and a fat lip and rah, rah, rah. And I kind of like, I pulled up and I parked in this like little car park, and I was just having the moment of like, do I do the gig? Do I walk into this like lovely art gallery with all of these rich people, or do I not? And Cavalier was like, fuck it, we're going to go in and we can just do me and then we can leave if you want. But you can do that. Cavalier off the top of your head. It's a minute 55 every time. And you can go in and do that. So I went in and we did like 3 15-minute sets each, but it was this one poem that really grounded me and was like, all right, cool, like let's settle in. And yeah, just like Cavalier is my like comfort blanket poem a lot of the time. And yeah, at some point, just like it stops being about, yeah, like it is as much its grown up thing as anything else. Like it has its own personality. It doesn't quite talk to me. I'm not quite at that stage yet, but hopefully at some point. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for your perspectives. Thank you everyone for your questions. Yeah, if that pretty much brings us to the top of the hour, which is our ending point. If all of the wonderful humans that spoke today want to drop their social media handles in the chat, just when you sign off from this meeting, you will be given a survey where you can indicate if you want anybody's buying information if you missed it in the chat. So feel free to answer that with whoever you would like to get any buying information for. But yeah, we'll just drop our socials in here. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Perry, for hosting and organizing everything. And really, again, you guys are all amazing. Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And thank you everyone. And
You.
yeah, it's been brilliant. Blown away.